So I think when people look into what you do, I think the first question that arises from that are like, why do eating disorders form? Like, what is actually going on?
Yeah. Yeah. It's a really good question. And it's a really complicated question, I think, because one of the things when we think about eating disorders, we always think about food. So we assume that an eating disorder is a problem with food, which naturally it is. There are sort of symptoms that kind of occur around food. But I think if I was to invite somebody to sit here who has an eating problem and explain to you what the difficulty is, food would be one of the last things that they would probably talk about. I think what you would hear is that it's a response to emotional pain. It's often a response to trauma. It often responds to a feeling of being very out of control in your life, of not really feeling like you have a sense of your world that you're living in. For a lot of people, they'll talk about perfectionism, this kind of drive to be the very best that they can be at all times, and how that becomes sort of maladaptive. And I think a lot of it, and for me, and I've been a psychotherapist for sort of 25 years now, I think a lot of it is around identity. I think it's really struggling to know sort of who I am in the world and to make sense of my world. And the eating disorder, it provides this predictability and this sense of control when life feels very overwhelming.
I mean, we were talking just before that, and I was saying that I've got ADHD.
Mhm.
Is there like a form of OCD that comes around eating disorders?
So I think a lot of people with eating disorders can also have OCD. So they're two distinct diagnoses, if you like. But what we can see is quite a lot of quite obsessional, quite compulsive behaviors and thoughts and thinking around the eating problem. So, when we think around food and weight, for example, people can be very fixated on particular numbers. If we're thinking about a restrictive eating disorder like anorexia, for example, then somebody may become very kind of hyper focused on calories or number of steps or particular behaviors and things that they're doing in order to allow themselves, something to eat or whatever that might look like. And I think that very obsessive compulsive thinking is important to sort of acknowledge that that might sit more typically with somebody with a restrictive eating problem. Whereas if you're thinking about a binge eating disorder, or you're thinking about ARFID, or you're thinking about bulimia, like that might look quite different. And when we think about eating disorders, we tend to think about anorexia because that's the one that most people talk about, I guess. Yeah.
What's the difference between what's going on in the brain with binge eating versus someone that could be perhaps anorexic? Because I can imagine there's similar tracks, right?
Mhm. It's really interesting. We're Orri, we run a group program, and we will have people with all different diagnoses, binge eat disorder, bulimia, anorexia, in shared group spaces. And the reason that we do that is because fundamentally, going back to what I was saying a moment ago, eating disorders are about emotional discomfort, emotional pain, emotional dysregulation. And whatever the eating disorder is, that's looking to help solve that problem. And so when we think about what's happening sort of neurochemically, neurobiologically for somebody when they're sort of in that experience, I guess it's a response to how they are feeling, how that eating disorder is presenting in their life, and what it's there to do, like what it's there to serve, if you like. So I think the way that we tend to think about it is much more through that sort of lived experience of having that eating problem. If we get sort of really sort of hung up on the sort of behaviors and the food and the weight, etc., we sort of compound the eating difficulty rather than kind of taking that kind of broader look to say, okay, well, how is this serving you? What is the function of the eating problem that you have? Because it is functional, and I know that sounds counterintuitive, but it has a purpose and it helps. And so if you can understand what the eating problem is doing, then you can work out, okay, how are we going to help that person to recover? Because, we're going to find new ways of managing those difficulties that someone's having.
It's interesting. I had one of the reasons that I was really excited to actually chat to you is there was a lady on the podcast called Kirsty MacLeod.
Mhm.
She's absolutely incredible. I'd urge anyone to listen to her episode. Really, really inspirational. And I'm sure she won't mind me talking about this because she did talk about it on the podcast, but
Mhm.
she had quite extreme anorexia. And what she did is she turned everything around and she almost put the addiction that was anorexia into sport. And now she is, running Ironmans and doing Hyroxes and this incredible, amazing achievements. But
Mm.
she almost discussed it as if she was putting one addiction into another. Like she needed to be obsessive about something, but she didn't want that to be food anymore because she knew what that was doing to her body. Is that like, can you do that in life? Is it possible that if you have anorexia, or let's say you binge eat, or there's an addiction when it comes to food, can you kind of change your mindset to be addicted to something else?
I mean, and I obviously don't want to speak about Kirsty's experience, and so this is my kind of general thoughts around this. But one of the things when somebody presents with an eating problem is, as I said, you're looking at kind of what's the function of that eating problem? What is it there to do? What is it there to help and to manage and to serve? And sometimes people can have multiple, we call them bounces. Okay, so multiple bounces that kind of make up their eating problem. And one of those might be exercise and movement. One of them could be identity related. Sometimes it can be kind of, work. It can be sex. It can be all sorts of different things that people can use as a means of kind of helping them to manage those feelings that they're having. And exercise is a really complicated one because, everybody's encouraged to exercise. It's good for you, endorphins, all of this kind of stuff, right? And I agree with all of that wholeheartedly. One of the questions I often sort of ask people when they first sort of present in treatment and we're thinking about their relationship with movement or exercise is, do you enjoy it? And people go, oh, yeah, no, I love it. I really love it. And I have to do it. And you kind of get into this discussion and you realize that they feel this deep kind of, they're it's like almost like a compulsion, like I have to do it. And I say, oh, talk to me about having to do it. And they will feel that it gives them permission for other things. It gives them that sense of control. It's almost sometimes like a sense of purging, like I get everything out. I clear my head. My body feels, kind of like pushed to the max, whatever it might be. And there's still something that they are getting that therefore allows them to do something else. They're not in this kind of place of balance where, I love running, I love yoga, I'm an ex-dancer, that's my background. So I really enjoy movement. But I have a choice. If it's absolutely lashing with rain outside, I might look at my dog and go, do you really want to go out today? And we
Mm.
might not go. If I've got an eating disorder that's really driving that, I'm going to look at the rain. I might have a stress fracture. I might have a dog that's completely exhausted, but we're going out. We're going to do the 5K or the 10K because that's what's on the, the chart to do today. And it's that relationship that we have to be really thoughtful around.
So it's almost like the compulsion or addiction can go too far.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I suppose the next question that arises from that is, how can you stop that voice in your head that says that is, you're compulsed to do that thing?
Yeah, how indeed. I mean, this is a really complex one. And if, one of your listeners thinks they've cracked it, let me know. I think it takes a long time is the reality. And it takes understanding. It takes thoughtfulness. Like we have to kind of look at what happens. I work very somatically when I work with clients, and the team here work through a very sort of somatic lens, because the body in an eating problem is, well, in everybody's body, right? Your body is an amazing communicator. It's like a series of lots of little signals that are constantly giving you information. And when you're in harmony, sort of mind and body, the two things are kind of unstoppable, right? So if you can really tune into the sensations in your body, if you can hear what it's communicating to you, and we do that consciously and unconsciously, sometimes you meet someone and you just have a really good feeling about them. And sometimes you meet someone and you really don't. And you don't, immediately sort of initially do a sort of big analysis of that. You kind of take that as read. You kind of go, huh. And then latterly, you'll kind of bring your sort of thoughtfulness around that and try to sort of make sense of it. That's your body's emotional kind of signals kind of kicking off. And we do that with everything in our bodies. They're just this extraordinary sort of, well of information. In an eating problem, that gets kind of interrupted. And so we start to override that process. And I think the difficulty then when we start to look at the kind of compulsive parts of the behavior are that it becomes almost behavioral. It's just, this is what I do. It doesn't matter what I feel like. It doesn't matter whether I've got shin splints and I'm going to go and knock out a 10K today. That is what I've got to do. So we start to override that information. So the work of recovery is really helping somebody back into that connectivity. But the connectivity back into the body is a place of terror for somebody with an eating problem. The body has become an unsafe home, which is deeply, deeply sad when you think we all live in our bodies, we inhabit our bodies. You are not you without your body. But so many people I have worked with over the years have said, if I could just leave my body, I'd be okay. And that's
really sad.
Yes, deeply, deeply sad. Yeah. I don't want to live in this body. I don't want to be part of this body anymore.
And how do you bring people back from that? Because I mean, that's it's a huge statement. It's almost like you're, for lack of a better term, it's borderline, suicidal ideation because you don't want to be there anymore.
Yeah. You don't want to live in this form. It depends how you bring someone back, I guess. It's understanding why you've had to leave. Why has that body become so unsafe? Is it what you feel in your body? Is it things that have happened to your body that have made the body feel unsafe? Is it that you don't feel you should ever have lived in this particular body? You find yourself in a body that you don't understand or don't recognize. There's so many layers to that complicated relationship with a body. And for those who have never had to kind of question that, it feels illogical. I'm in this body. I just exist in this way. But for so many, and I think for a lot of people, the body ideals that we live alongside, this sort of whole, and it's happening again now. I was kind of growing up in the 90s, and we had this real kind of, you need to be thin to be accepted, and that seemed to sort of evolve away slightly, but we're right back in it with the GLP-1 drugs and all of that stuff around. So we have all these external things that teach us our bodies are wrong, but then we have this deep internal relationship, which I think goes all the way back to your sort of early attachment. Was this a body? Was this a baby that was sort of adored and cherished and, was really held in mind by their sort of early attachment figures? Were you in relationships that were able to tolerate that? And all of these things lay down those very sort of early relationships with our bodies, really.
If you guys enjoyed that clip, please do me a huge favor before you go and head over to our Into the Mind podcast official page where we have the raw, uncut Into the Mind podcast, and hit that subscribe button. And the more subscribers we get, the more incredible guests we can get on the show. I really appreciate you guys for watching. Thank you so much. And I'll see you all real soon.